Thank you for your patience. Call to order the semi-monthly meeting of the Coastal Resources Management Council. Today is Tuesday, November 1, 2022. First matter on our agenda, well, actually, I'll do a roll call of council members for attendance. Let's see what's here. Mr. Sahajian.
Present.
Ms. McGovern.
Present.
Mr. Gomez.
Present.
Mr. Izzy.
Present.
Mr. Gagnon.
Present.
Ms. Hall.
Here.
Trish here?
No.
Okay. And I'm Raymond Coyer and I am here. Let the record reflect the CRMC staff members that are present this evening. And first matter on our agenda would be approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, that meeting being held on Tuesday, October 11, 2022. I know they've been disseminated. I'd entertain a motion to accept them.
So moved.
Motion has been made by Mr. Sahajian, seconded by Mr. Izzy. Was it Mr. Izzy or Gagnon? Mr. Gagnon? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I am abstaining. I was not here that evening. Next matter is subcommittee reports.
There are no subcommittee reports tonight, Mr. Chair.
All right, staff reports.
Again, no staff report again tonight.
This brings us to our one agenda item. Maybe I should because everyone's here. What do you think?
Go ahead.
Yeah. All right, our one and only matter to be heard this evening is to review an action regarding application requiring public hearing and special exception. That matter being 2021-07-005 Revolution Wind. For the benefit of those here, I will read what the application is. It's two submarine export transmission cables of 275 kilovolt high voltage alternating current have been proposed for the project. Each cable measures approximately 23 miles in length and has been proposed to be installed in CRMC Type 4 and 6 waters in Rhode Island Sound and the West Passage of Narragansett Bay, making landfall at the Quonset Business Park, North Kingston. The export cable will cross an area of particular concern as identified by Ocean Special Area Management Plan, Section 11.10.2, and will require a special exception under Coastal Resources Management Program, Section 1.1.8. The cables will be installed at a target burial depth of 4 to 6 feet or deeper, in parentheses, below the seabed, which will create a total estimated disturbance of approximately 730 acres within state waters. Secondary cable protection in the form of rock bags, concrete mattresses, and/or rock berms may be used where the target burial depth cannot be achieved. The export cables will make landfall at the Quonset Business Park, the heavily industrial waterfront via horizontal directional drilling, which will require the construction of 2 offshore exit pits. After joining with the export cables, the onshore transmission cable will follow Circuit Drive northwest to 135 Circuit Drive, where it will cross this property north of the existing driveway and cross the property in a north-northwest direction until reaching the property owned by Quonset Development Corporation. Here, the cable will continue north until reaching 101 Circuit Drive. The cable will then continue north across 101 Circuit Drive and 75 Circuit Drive within the existing paved access road to the existing Davisville substation. At the Davisville substation, the cable continues west, parallel to the northern property boundary before reaching the Narragansett Electric Company's parcel. After crossing, the cable enters the onshore substation, tying into the proposed access road. The total cable length is approximately 1 mile. So that is the application and the description of the application before us this evening. The applicant is present. Attorney Robin Main is here, representing the applicant. And prior to calling upon Mr. Skenyon, who I believe did some review of this, I'm going to ask our executive director, Mr. Willis, to give us a brief description and game plan for this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to bring everybody up to speed on where we're at, why we're here, and some of the logistics of this meeting. And I'll go into some detail on where we're going to go with the process of the meeting and where we're going to go from here forward. So the application that we're hearing tonight is for work, as explained by the chair, as requested by Revolution Wind, that is within state waters and state jurisdiction only. As you all know, there is an offshore wind farm also being proposed, but this particular application is only for the work that needs to occur in state waters or state jurisdiction. So we will not be just talking about the offshore wind farm tonight or in any related hearing on this matter. But there is a lot to cover tonight. We anticipate this application will be heard over 2 meetings, tonight and on the November 22nd meeting. We have set aside those 2 hearing dates to hear this application. We will hear from staff on the proposed work. We'll also hear from the applicant on the proposed work, and we'll also hear the applicant's arguments as to why the project is consistent with our program. We'll hear from staff on our review of the activity in the application and consistency with our program. Just want to let everybody know, we have spent a lot of time with the applicant, working on a lot of different issues associated with the activities being requested. We've spent several meetings going over specific issues. We've invited our Fisheries Advisory Board, our Habitat Advisory Board to those meetings to discuss them and find ways to find common ground on how to move them forward. We've also had weekly meetings with the applicant every Friday morning at 10 o'clock. We've had meetings with the applicant to go over these issues in detail so that we can find common ground on how to move these issues forward. There's been a lot of discussion with all the parties involved on a lot of the different activities involved in this application to try to find that common ground. We're all looking for agreement on how to move forward. Everybody participated in those meetings. Everybody had words to say. Everybody had ideas to move forward. We all didn't agree on everything, but we all agreed to participate, and we all agreed to find common ground, and we think we did that. So before I hand it off to staff, I just want to recognize them. Justin Skenyon, who did in large part, wrote the staff report with input from all of us, but was our principal staff person that moved this issue forward. Kevin Sloan, David Ciacchetto, Laura Dwyer, myself, I had a hand in this, and many other staff worked very hard to get the staff report to the point where it is today, that we can work with the FAB, we can work with the applicant on that staff report and the stipulations contained therein to be in agreement on how to move this application forward. So I just wanted to recognize them for their hard work and thank them very much for the amount of time and effort they put into this. It's obviously well recognized, and I just want everybody to understand that. So Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn the rest of the presentation over to Justin to present the issues as we saw them in our review of the application.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Willis. Well, before that, any questions of Mr. Willis from council members? Hearing none. Justin Skenyon, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. All right, I'm going to start off with touching on what Mr. Willis has just outlined with what this project is going to be focused on here tonight. So this project in CRMC is in basically 3 parts. We have the offshore federal consistency portion, which is the wind turbines. What we're reviewing tonight is the inland cable, the substation, and the cable going up West Bay Passage. This does not include the transmission facility that is covered under a freshwater wetlands application. So tonight, I thought the best way to move forward, and I'm going to touch on all the areas of the application that were of critical importance. And I'm going to do that from the order of basically from offshore, inshore. winding, just to kind of give a vague outline of how this is going to go. So as described, this project includes 2 offshore transmission cables running in parallel for 23 miles up the West Bay Passage. Back in 2018, CRMC with a bunch of stakeholders from fab to communities to experts, with applicants, with offshore wind representatives and representatives from DEM and NOAA, I believe, started off a process of a notice of advanced public rulemaking to include a change to our red book that included requirements for the cable. One of these was a cable route proposal for a corridor. The applicant is using this corridor as we described. We have set this area aside to that because from our conversations and everything, this was a very solid way to avoid as many impacts as we could, while giving anyone with the offshore wind access to an non-shore tie-in. That's a big thing with this project is where the cable has to go. It has to make landfall, and this is it's a large amount of power. The PPA right now is for 704 megawatts, which gives limited avenues for where the power can flow into the grid. So part of that, and the biggest part of minimizing any potential impacts, staff believes, is ensuring the cable achieves proper cable burial depth. That is between 4 and 6 feet or deeper. This is kind of the best area where it minimizes all potential negatives of the cable getting exposed to anything or getting damaged, and it minimizes impact from EMF. So working with the applicant, we were able to go through and try to ensure what is the best methods they could use and the best technology they can approach for trying to achieve this goal. Which was, so in our discussions with them, the application indicates that up to 10% of the cable may be exposed to and therefore require secondary cable protection. That was a problem because then you have increased impacts to change it. You have impacts to the environment through permanent habitat change from a soft bottom habitat to hard bottom habitat. You have potential snags that the fishing community can run to. You have an increased EMF impact due to and I'll go into more detail on EMF in a bit. The applicant indicated that they showed us that they have done the utmost to choose the best method they could. They're using 2 primary methods throughout the bay. One is a mechanical plow, and the other is a jet plow. They're going to change those out at the Jamestown Bridge area due to the fact that it's much shallower north of the Jamestown Bridge, and the bottom habitat's a little more conducive to using a jet plow. So when you look at cable burial and how we've come to understand it, the biggest things that stop cable from being properly buried come in 2 factors. First is changing of the equipment or mechanical breakdown or anything that stops the process. So if you have to bring the cable up to the boat to fix something or fix the machine, that cable cannot go right back to where it started. It has to be out and has to get retrenched in. So that will lead to exposed cable. The second is if something gets hit that will knock the machine up or off the side, whether it's a different sediment layer or a unforeseen boulder. So working with the applicant, they have done their duty to go through and measure settlement, analyze it, and come up with a profile of the cable from state water, from the state boundary, all the way up through the bay. This includes sediment analysis and sampling. This includes side scan sonars. And from those, they were able to identify areas of boulders that were potentially in the way that will be moved during the process. We did stipulate how that can be done in the report. And that was in contrast with work with DEM for that part. That's critical because if anything, if you hit a giant rock, it's going to pop out. So the applicant has identified these locations and does plan to do seabed preparation to change that. So with those measures, we feel that the applicant should achieve the best they can or best possible with the current technology and methodology for this kind of cable in state waters for that least amount of exposure they can. And now I'm going to go into why that's critical. As mentioned before, this cable is going to make 7 crossings that will require secondary cable protection at the minimum. These crossings are usually cables or pipes that you cannot cut through, so you have to go over. And if you go over, then you got to pad it, so that way nothing gets hit. And you got to pad in such a way that it doesn't get knocked off. And so anything like that, anything of that nature, is a hazard to not only the applicant's cable, but also to anyone who's either fishing out there or there's a new that means new hangs. So we also required the applicant to outline and survey and hand off to the fishing community with new maps and new information, any of these potentials that are going to have to exist out there. Now, and then when you look at the potential, when you look at what's going to be used, the applicant has a few options which they will deem during the cable with their cable burial plan will come back with what will be the best tool for which kind of exposure we're looking at. There's many different kinds of ways the cable can be at risk and possibly exposed. Not all of them require the same solution. The most popular one is what we call mattress protection, which is a articulated concrete mat that's linked together that will be laid down on the cable. And there's rock bags and that kind of as another option. We requested the applicant work to, and they have indicated they want to address those methods that will have the least environmental impact. We have noticed down at from the block iron project that the articulated mattress is there, and through some other studies of other things, they not always the most conducive, but they are the industry standard, and they are very effective. So not a requirement, it's something the applicant is willing to do because it's part of the mitigation process of any potential impacts. Second, we've heard from the fishing community at large concern about EMF, electromagnetic fields being generated from these cables. Power cables of this size and with this much power through it have a large magnetic output. And a lot of benthic species and a lot of fish and a lot of all those lobster, crab, and so on, they sense electromagnetic fields as part of their, way they navigate, way they sense, way they hunt. That stuff can have potential impacts to, if high enough, to the fishing environment, essentially. The way to properly address EMF is through distance. And in this case, that means burying it deep. And if you bury it deep and consistently, there's a world of difference even a few feet can make. The applicant has given us some estimates on their what the EMF should look like at peak loading. So at peak loading at 704 megawatts, a cable that is just protected by secondary cable protection, which doesn't impact the EMF. Secondary protection is not shielding in any sense, is about 1,052 milligauss, which is pretty significant. It's not to the point where we've seen some studies indicate that there could be potential issues. But it's not universally considered the threshold. BOEM has put out some indication, BOEM has put out paper, BOEM and other scientific literature has been indicated that that threshold is a little higher than that. Also that AC current is different than the current that is the natural background magnetic field. But there's also other reports that we were talked about with the community and that we received from our from URI that indicates that that's not always the case. And so there's still some scientific literature debate up on it. And given the nature of this cable and the fact there's two of them and going up the bay, we endeavored to minimize any theoretical impact, which to prove that Revolution Wind has demonstrated through the estimates that even achieving a 3.5 foot burial depth would reduce any EMF to surface to like 82, if I remember that number correctly, which is, you know, almost a factor of 10 reduction. And one of the things we looked at when trying to minimize impact. So those are the major concerns with the cable. There was, during the installation process, the mechanical plow and the jet plow, they operate displacing the sediment and plowing through it essentially. During displacement, there will be sediment kickup, which is a concern to certain environmental factors such as benthic species getting smothered, any aquaculture in the area potentially getting impacted. Staff review those concerns and does not, it indicates that even though the impacts would exist, given in essence, this relatively small area compared to the rest of the environment, that the sediment will, in the temporary, as in, you know, days and hours to returning back to normal background sediment, this disturbance is unavoidable, but also not disastrous. So, and we also plan, also the applicant has indicated that they are, and we are willing to work with agriculturists that seem to be concerned. Most agriculture sites are far enough away from the cable and the main activity that they shouldn't be affected by what we've seen in our staff report, unless some other changes occur. So that is for the day cable heading up to near shore. At near shore, the applicant is going to go to do a horizontal directional drilling activity. This was absolutely requested by CRMC and the applicant has agreed. Coming off of our experience with the Block Island Wind Project, where the onshore cable was not horizontally drilled at first, it was trenched all the way to the substation. It came unburied, and it came unburied on a public beach, and it affected a lot of people, and affected it cost a lot of money to eventually had to be rebuilt. That cost a lot of money to Deepwater, which was bought out by Ørsted, and now the cable itself was bought out by National Grid, and it cost National Grid a lot of money to have to rebury it, and it took about 2 years to accomplish that. So we indicated that, you know, they should be very seriously considered to do this method, and they agreed, and we're here. The reason, so horizontal directional drilling is when you pretty much put a hole deep underground all the way through, and it comes up the other end, and then you filter it through. So all the above sediment is, you know, all above rock and everything there is still there. So you didn't remove it. It allows you to get much deeper. The applicant has indicated that the depth should be between 10 and 18 feet, which is more than sufficient probably for any coastal activity that could disrupt. Now, to do this, a exit pit is going to be formed offshore. They're going to trench the material. Sorry, they're going to dredge the material out of this pit loaded up into barges for temporarily, do the pull through the line, connect the cable there, rebury everything. This is we consider this a dredging application style. That is the best way to do this. It is also the least impact to users, the least impact to, and in the less risky. The location also of the cable outside of horizontal directional drilling is good. The applicant has worked very well with Quonset to get all the permissions needed and required to land their cable there. This is not in a public beach. This is not in a wetland. This is on a revetment than a heavily industrialized area, the prime location for a activity that is disruptive like this. From there, the applicant is going to trench the cable inland along what was outlined by the chair earlier. It follows mostly roads, and then it's going to cut across the transmission facility and into what they're going to construct to be a new substation. This is, they've gotten permission to go along the area. North Kingston has signed off on this. They went through the approval process from the Energy Facility Siting Board. The Energy Facility Siting Board has requested, and the applicant worked with us to fill that request, that they alter the routes to not impact a local neighborhood. That was done. It didn't, they worked with us, they got us the update. We approve of that, and we're happy the applicant can now avoid noise mitigation and potential traffic hazards. All this work, it's time to mention the time of year restrictions. All this work is going to happen during our traditional dredge window from end of October to early January. Early February, over basically 2 years time of construction. This is a very important requirement of the applicant because it will limit potential impact to anything recreational by hanging into the summer months and potential impact to multiple species. I'll go into potential species impacts a little later and why we think some of the major species will not be critically damaged or critically affected. But I'm going to cover the substation first. So the applicant is going to need to build a new substation to handle the power. There exists in the location nearby an existing transmission facility that will be upgraded as part of this project, but that is not handled under this application. So that is the main reason why the substation is going there, is for this new tie-in. So it meets the purpose and need there. It's also being built on what is an old capped landfill from the days when Quonset was used as a military base. So this area, nothing can really be built on it that would be like with people consideration. So this is a good use for that kind of land. The applicant has shrunk the size of the facility to the greatest extent you can shrink one of these substations while still holding to all the safety requirements and spacing that these stations require through other federal regulations. There's limits to there's limits to how much distance you can retract and how big the fences have to be, and et cetera, for worker safety and for public, like closing it off. With that, the applicant will encroach a little bit on the buffer to the wetland, not the wetland itself. So the wetlands remain not directly impacted, which brings us to what could potentially indirectly impact them, which is stormwater. The applicant, we have worked really hard, really well with both DEM and the applicant about stormwater analysis for this project. The applicant, there's a couple changes to the regs that we had to look at because the way a substation is, you can't have a lot of vegetation of any kind on a substation because of, you can't. it's a giant electrical facility. It's actually a risk to have anything hanging close by. So yeah, but the applicant was still able to meet what is needed in terms of quality of water quality certification. They use some use of temporary roads is fine because of the lack of we traditionally gravel roads are not considered impervious under our regulations, because if you use them enough, the stone breaks down and kind of creates a like solid surface essentially. But if you use it temporarily, as this facility will, due to the non-mained, not always manned nature of it, the applicant is more than welcome to. It will not affect it. So that was good. And so I think the one thing I did forget to mention is that back to impacts with species and impacts to recreational. This cable is assumed that once it's buried, it will remain buried unless there is a critical failure of some kind, which is unexpected, such as an anchor tearing at it or anything, which goes back to why we need to achieve proper cable burial depth, because that minimizes the risk of any potential anchor snags. So during the lifetime of this project, which is estimated to be 25 years, maintenance on a cable is not really expected, or have to be a critical problem for that. Not to say no work's going to happen out there. We've requested the applicant to ensure the cable remains buried, perform surveys. We have worked with DM to write those, and the applicant to write reasonable timelines for routine surveys. These surveys will be conducted throughout the entirety of the state cable, and will be reported to CRMC for review, essentially. This will ensure that if anything is missed, or if anything becomes uncovered, or if, whatever reason, if there's for instance, if the applicant knows that if there's a storm that comes by, they will have to go out, depending on the size of the storm. Like a once in a 50-year event will require, we'll probably have someone have to check it. Those will ensure everything's pretty much continuing to function and continuing to have the minimal risks that we can. So that's during the lifetime of the project. Periodic surveys happening every 5 to 10 years, sometimes more frequently depending on the weather. Decommissioning is still a bit theoretical at this point. BOEM is working on, it's kind of a new thing for these projects. So now for impacts to the environment, specifically species that are in the area. Time restriction was a massive part, as I mentioned earlier, of trying to avoid impacts to these species. Major one, there's a couple major species consideration that CRMC always focus on: submerged aquatic vegetation, or SAV. There really is no SAV near this project in any reasonable degree that should be impacted. Closest SAV we have is basically 850 feet away and over 1,000 feet away. Given the models we've seen, it's not indicating the sediment the sediment is not going to result in significant burial. There's also any benthic species, so anything with mussels, mollusks, conch worms that live around the ocean sediment, they will be impacted from, obviously from a plow going through. But this is comparatively for the entire disturbance area compared to the rest of the sound, the bay. It's much. They will be able to repopulate within a few years at most, and relatively speaking, minimum impact compared to large areas. Winter flounder also lay their eggs. They're one of the few species that really like procreates and during the winter months. But the eggs tend to favor sandy bottoms and shallow water habitats, which are pretty far away from where the cable is going to be. So while the eggs are vulnerable to burial, there should be, much farther away. We don't really anticipate any impacts to the population. There's other species that are in the area, but those were the ones that were the major concern. This application also comes with a variance and a special exemption request, which I'm going to leave to the applicant to discuss more detail on. The special exception is to our APC for recreational. And the variance request is for monitoring, pre-application monitoring requirements. And with that, I think that's everything I need to conclude with a brief overview of the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Scanlon. Any questions?
Good job.
Yes,
Uh,
questions before? Yeah.
Any questions of Justin? Don?
Just, I'm just trying to get everything straight in my head. And some of you answered some of the questions I had. Is the cable, what's the armoring that's used on that cable? Is it when you go over the pipelines or that type of thing, you get that secondary protection?
Yes, so,
The cable has special armoring. You indicated the mattresses and the rocks and things, but
so the cable itself.
yeah,
Yeah.
Just to toughen it up more, is the whole cable armored? The
Yes.
whole cable armored, or just those areas that come up on the surface? Really matter, I guess. The basic question is the armoring.
So the cable itself is actually like, best way to think about it is like 3 cables combined,
Yeah.
surrounded by like a shell. So it's a pretty thick shell around those 3 cables. And then whenever it gets close, there'll be like an artificial something, like either in this most industry standard is concrete mattresses. So that there'll be nothing except for the cable itself and at least 3.5 feet or 4 feet of sediment. And then if
So-
there's not that, then
So
there'll be,
the mattresses, like what, the block island?
yes.
And then you put sediment over the top of that. Is that what you said?
No, you would not put sediment over the top of the mattresses. It might accumulate there naturally,
Yeah.
but usually the mattress just lay down. It's usually in areas where the sediment will not stay, do you put the mattresses.
And on the NETIC, on the EMF shielding, what materials did they use to try to contain the EMF? I'm familiar with NETIC and co-NETIC type materials that basically will encapsulate the EMF that really reduces the output. Was the cable built with any regards to the EMF relative to shielding embedded inside the cable?
Yes. Okay, so this is a little bit more of a complicated question than it appears on its surface.
I'm bringing it out.
No.
It'll get answered along the way.
Yeah, no, this is part of the nature to deal with a large project like this. There was a further analysis presented by the applicant to BOEM that indicated how the binding of the cable itself can help the cables themselves cancel out
Exactly,
the EMF.
exactly, right.
I considered that. We also received that analysis without, and obviously then with the canceling, there was less EMF. So this represents not only the worst case in terms of it doesn't include that analysis, but our analysis. But we are aware the applicant did do that.
But you're relying basically on burying it
Yeah.
to try to contain it. Is there any thing that was done to determine any effects on the ship electronics, those types of things, small craft, any of that? Or don't we anticipate any EMF problems to electronics, GPS systems and things like that?
We really don't, because EMF as it's works is like, as you know, as you get farther away, it gets exponentially less powerful.
That was my worst cause.
Yeah. So exactly, yeah. So like, even in the worst case, you're like looking at, 3 feet or 4 feet in the water column, going back to the basic background essentially.
All right, that's
So,
good.
Unless you're really, really shallow, you're not even it's gonna be washed out essentially at that point.
This was it a broad frequency considered? Did it include harmonics and things like that that are associated with the EMF fields?
So
Is it pretty much is EMF pretty much contained into a small range, or is it quite large? I guess is the question.
it's contained into a fairly small range of 60 hertz.
Okay.
Around that, that's what all,
And
yeah.
do you consider 120, which would probably be high frequency, probably reduce faster, but, which is, the first time on.
Yeah, that is possible. This would be around 60, which is the opposite to like the 0.01 hertz that the Earth's magnetic field is. But yeah,
I don't want to belabor this. I'm just trying
no, go right ahead.
to sort things out in my head, so I'm going to have to ask again. But on the cable lay, you said you did some bottom profiling to determine if you have rocks and things?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let's see. All right, so we learned on the trenching and the horizontal drilling, we got that out of the Block Island thing, that was good. And more of a operational question, which you didn't cover, but I'm wondering if there's going to be any use of independent observers to watch this process, as we did with the Block Island farm. Yes? Okay.
Yes. The certified CVAs will be
Exactly. Okay.
present for this entire thing.
Perfect.
They'll be the same CVAs used for the federal consistency. The applicant is going to use them for both. Yeah.
You mentioned decommissioning. What do we expect for life expectancy, I guess?
This project is expected to be constructed and then fully operational, constructed within 2 years and then fully operational for 25 years.
Yeah, which, and Block Island, I think ended up 20, but it was
Yeah.
25 year.
That's kind of what we're seeing a lot of the leases and proposals be about now, is at least 25 years.
Thanks for your patience.
Oh, no problem. Happy to.
Any other questions of Mr. Scanlon by council members? Hearing none, I will now turn it over to the applicant and Attorney Main.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good
Good
evening.
evening. My name is Robin Main. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Hinckley Allen, and my partner from Hinckley, Christine Dieter, and I represent Revolution Wind. On behalf of Revolution Wind, we want to thank all of you for the opportunity to present here tonight. And we do want to extend our thanks to Justin Skenyon, Kevin Sloan, David Chiacchetto, and Jeff Willis for all the work, and Jeff talked about it a few minutes ago, but for all the work that the staff has done on this application to bring us here before you tonight, including the extensive work on the staff report, all much appreciated. Tonight, Revolution Wind relies on its application and the various filings to support its request for an assent. And we show through those filings, and we will further affirm that with the testimony tonight, that we meet the requirements of the CRMC program in order for an assent to issue under this Category B application. So tonight we will present several witnesses. The first witness will cover an overview of the project. Then the next witness up will talk about the construction schedule, among other things, for the project, including some of the local permitting. Then our cable expert will come up and describe some of the installation work for the cable, and also address some of the points that Mr. Gomez made a few moments ago. And then we will finish up with a few witnesses who deal with our special exception, rebuttable presumption on the recreational area of particular concern, and then on our request for a variance. So if the chair and the council would like, this evening, we can make at the conclusion of that testimony our arguments for the special exception and the variance, but certainly up to the council. And without further ado, I'll call our first witness so we can get on with this evening.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Our first witness is Helen Ingalls. If you not, all right. Here, and then
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear and affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Kellen Ingalls, KELLENGALLS.
might be better if you angle a little bit so the stenographer can also hear you. All right, again, state your name for the record.
Kellen Ingalls,
Right, and Kellen, by whom are you employed?
Orsted.
And what is your role at Orsted?
I am the Project Development Director for Revolution Wind.
And is Revolution Wind the only project that you work on, Kellen?
It is.
Okay. Before we get into your job at Orsted as the Development Director for Revolution Wind, tell the council briefly about your educational background and professional experience leading up to your time at Orsted.
Sure. So I have a master's degree in English with a concentration in environmental studies. Since receiving that degree, I've focused mainly on renewable energy development here in New England and in New York, from small scale solar to now offshore wind. And I joined Orsted approximately 3 years ago.
Great, thank you, Kellen. And Kellen, I want you to describe to the council who the applicant is here tonight. It's Revolution Wind LLC. To tell the council more about what Revolution Wind LLC is.
Okay, yeah. Revolution Wind LLC is a 50-50 joint venture between Orsted and Eversource. Eversource, of course, is a regional utility with a lot of experience building transmission and related infrastructure. They spent billions of dollars on transmission substations and cables. And Orsted is the world's leading offshore wind developer. We've been doing it for about 25 years, including the very first offshore wind farm in Denmark. And since then, we've installed approximately 1,600 wind turbines, and that makes for about 7,500 megawatts of capacity around the world.
Great, thank you. And now I'd like to turn your attention to an overview of what the Revolution Wind project is. And with that, we're going to show a demonstrative so that Helen can speak to that more. So Helen, explain Revolution Wind at a general level and then focus on the state jurisdictional aspects.
Sure. Understanding that it's not the subject of tonight's proceeding, I'll just start for some context with the wind farm. We've submitted to BOEM an application for up to 100 wind turbines out in this lease area. Each of those wind turbines will be connected to 2 offshore substations via buried array cables out there in the wind farm lease area again. From those substations, there will be 2 export cables running from the wind farm itself. The green line being traced here, approximately 19 miles in federal waters, and then the remaining 23 miles in state waters. And as we heard from Mr. Stone, that cable will be buried at a target depth of 3 to 4 feet. Once the cable gets to shore, and that yeah. There we go. Once it gets to shore, landfall will be at the Quonset Development Corporation's property, the Quonset Business Park. And we will be installing it via a horizontal directional drill, HDD sometimes we call it. That pit to bury that will be approximately 1,200 feet out off of the seawall that's there at Quonset. That HDD method will allow us to bury the cable or to drill the cable at a depth of approximately 60 feet at its deepest, underneath the seawall that's there, concrete seawall, emerging in a parking lot in the Quonset Business Park, the transition joint bank, where it will merge with the onshore portion of the cable, which is the line in purple. That's approximately 1 mile, buried primarily underneath roads and along private property where we've worked with the landowner to find the best possible route there. From there, it goes into the property that was described by Mr. Skenyon, where we'll construct an onshore substation, along with an interconnection facility where the power will connect to an existing substation at Davisville.
Thank you, Kellen. And now let's address need. Will the Revolution Wind project fulfill any need in Rhode Island?
It will.
And explain to the council what that is.
Sure. So as you undoubtedly know, Revolution Wind has some of the most ambitious clean energy goals in the nation.
Rhode Island?
Excuse me.
You said Revolution Wind. Rhode
Revolution
Island.
Wind. Rhode Island, they're synonymous. Rhode Island has some of the most ambitious clean energy goals in the nation. So just this year, it was mandated that all power by 2032, I believe, will be coming from renewable sources. And so the 400 megawatts that's contracted to Rhode Island from Revolution Wind will play a large role in meeting that mandate. We're going to need large projects like offshore wind to fill that need, and Revolution Wind is in a great spot to do that.
So Kellen, you said that Revolution Wind is bringing in 400 megawatts to Rhode Island of energy, all right? And how is that done? Is there an agreement for that?
Yes, there was a power purchase agreement, which was approved by the Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission in the summer of 2019.
And does that power purchase agreement have any type of milestones that you must meet in it as far as getting energy into the state of Rhode Island?
It does. So our current schedule has us operating in 2025, and that's right in line with the power purchase agreement milestones. And if we were to go beyond that, there are consequences, including potential termination rights and things that we don't want to occur.
And are you aware of the project's construction schedule?
Yes.
Can you tell the council briefly about it, but keep in mind that the next witness will talk about it in more detail.
Sure. So we have Megan Eakin here, our permitting manager, to talk about the nitty-gritty details with the schedule. But from a very high level, we expect to start construction in the fall of 2023. That's when BOEM's permit schedule has its last milestone, and we receive final approval again. And so we would complete the rest of the wind farm construction besides the HDD, horizontal directional drilling, and a portion of the seabed clearance activity in 2024. It includes the foundations, much of the cable laying, the wind turbines themselves. And then we would be operational in 2025.
And that schedule that you just talked about, does that take into account the time of year restrictions that Mr. Skenyon pointed out earlier?
It does.
So is there much maneuverability in this schedule in order to fulfill the milestones under the PPAs?
No, there isn't.
And Kellen, tell us, will the ratepayers of Rhode Island be on the hook for any of the costs of the project?
No,
And is there any Rhode Island state money in this project?
no, there's
Is there any federal money in this project? So let's focus on the Category B application. Are you familiar with the Category B application that's before the council tonight?
I am.
And what was your role, if any, with the development of this application?
So as the development director, I oversee permitting, site investigations, so the geophysical and geotechnical investigations of the seafloor, the commercial aspects of the wind farm, the design of the wind farm and cables, and the big picture. And so I'm there to make sure that everybody's talking, that we're pulling in all the best information, that we're using all of the resources we have at our disposal within the company. So we have a really world-class cable installation and engineering team, bringing them in. Gareth Ellis is here to talk to you tonight from that team. Site investigations, I mentioned geophysical and geotechnical information that they're receiving. That's understanding what rocks and dirt and everything is below the seafloor. What are we getting ourselves into here when we dig? And then also so that's the geotechnical. The geophysical would be what obstructions are there, shipwrecks, unexploded ordnances, et cetera.
Excuse me, after shipwrecks.
Unexploded ordnances. Right, so making sure that all of that information is brought to bear for this application. And so we're also working with a phenomenal consulting team, VHB, is working with our permitting folks to compile this application. And they bring a really regional, local expertise that fits well with our own permitting team and adds to it, where we bring in sort of a worldwide experience in this type of permitting. So it's making sure everybody's talking, making sure we're getting all the best information.
And Kellen, I now want to turn to another topic. Will Revolution Wind create any jobs in Rhode Island?
Well,
All right, explain what jobs will be created by Revolution Wind in Rhode Island.
so it's estimated that Revolution Wind will create approximately 1,000 direct construction jobs. That's during the construction of the wind farm in Rhode Island. On top of that, Ørsted has established its co-headquarters right in Providence, and there are a number of people employed there. We've grown very quickly. We've also set up an innovation hub in the CIC space in Providence, which really connects upstart businesses, good ideas, people who want to get involved in the offshore wind industry as it emerges. We help make those connections, help ideas become really tangible products that we can then work with them on. So that's what Ørsted's been able to do as a result of Revolution Wind in Rhode Island. The project itself is also committed to spending tens of millions of dollars on Rhode Island's ports. So you can see that right now at Provport, where we've constructed an advanced foundation component facility. Those components will be the complicated steel pieces that are going on the outside of the wind turbines. We're making those right here in Rhode Island. We've also signed an agreement for a helicopter use program at Quonset. Quonset's going to be a major part of our operations for our entire US portfolio, not just Revolution Wind, but Revolution Wind has helped to make that happen. We're also building a fleet of crew transfer vessels right here in Rhode Island at Blount Boats and Senesco. So those will be used to transport our crew right out to the wind farm from the operations hubs.
And Kellen, I want to turn back to the job creation. You talked about approximately 1,000 construction jobs being created. And then obviously the headquarters here and some other jobs through the manufacturing of the transport boats and so forth. Are there any other type of indirect jobs that will be created by the project?
There are. That number becomes closer to 3,000 when you consider the services, the equipment that'll be purchased by those employees, those workers. All the money spent because of those 1,000 approximate jobs, all the money that's spent from housing here during the construction phase.
Thank you. I have no further questions for Helen Abels.
Any questions from council members?
I have one.
Yes, Mr. Gagnon.
You mentioned the target burial depth of 3 to 4 feet, but our staff report, and what I understand, our target depth is 4 to 6 feet.
Yeah, I thought you said 4, but
That's a
Yeah.
mistake on my part. I apologize. 4 to 6 feet, target burial depth.
sorry, I thought you said 4 too. But we're probably,
There was a 4 of them.
okay.
I got one of them right.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Yes,
Just
Ms.
really
Hall?
quick, mine's probably really easy, and you may have said it. You mentioned a couple times about your role in terms of keeping everyone's talking, and there's some discussion in the report regarding historic preservation. And I was just curious about your outreach to Indigenous communities along the coastline with respect to that. I realize that there's some, proposed condition regarding memorandum of agreement, and that there would be oversight and involvement with CRMC at that point, but pre-project, I'm guessing, but I'd like to hear more about what you've done for that kind of reach out to really think through it, because we have had that issue here in Rhode Island already on the coast with underground cables with wind.
Great question. Thank you. That's a really important thing for us to maintain a relationship, to reach out to the tribes, to bring them into the discussion of what's happening. That's both onshore and offshore. The submerged lands were some of their ancestors 10,000 plus years ago, time immemorial. And so we have had extensive outreach and discussions with tribes. I believe we're the first offshore wind company to bring a tribal relations lead on board to help us facilitate those discussions. We think that's the start of what we should be doing with this industry. And so there's a tie on the state level to what's going on the federal level with Section 106, where we consult on historic and cultural properties, but it has to go deeper than that. We recognize that, and that's a really important part of our outreach.
So with that, is there any survey work? You talked earlier about boulders and, some other significant sort of benthic type characteristics. What about surveying for those types of cultural important artifacts?
We have done those surveys as well. Yeah, out in the ocean itself for those cultural resources, but also at the site of our substation onshore. And we had input from a number of the tribes on that.
What about in between?
And in between, all the way, start to finish, end to end. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Gomez?
Yeah, we just before I get to my question, the involvement of the tribes, were heavily involved with them when we developed the OSAM, which you've probably looked at. There's an interesting section in there on their local history and stuff, but and so they were brought on board really with the same need that you're expressing. I'm interested in where you cited some of the materials that will be built in state and locally. The other materials, where is most of it manufactured? The cable, for instance, or the major pieces, the blades, whatever.
Sure. So the backdrop of this is we're starting a new U.S. industry with a lot of European experience that we're bringing, but bringing that over here and having it stand up on its own is really important to us. So the cable itself, we're working with, Gareth Ellis can speak a lot more to that, but we're working with a U.S. company on that. We are working to set up a whole supply chain in the U.S. Yeah. We're using, for example, the first U.S. Jones Act compliant turbine installation vessel that's being built right now in Texas.
Great. Thank you.
Ms. McGovern.
The 400 megawatt hours is going to the state of Rhode Island. Where specifically are those wind turbines located? Are they in Rhode Island state waters? Where are they located?
That's a good question. So no, the wind turbines are in federal waters, and it's not necessarily a specific turbine that's allocated, but it's an allocation that's done at the metering point, at the point of interconnection.
allocation that's done at the what point?
At the point of interconnection, the metering point.
So they have all one point of interconnection.
That's right.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
call
you.
our next witness.
Okay.
Our next witness is Megan Eakin. And I think it might be better if you stand there and I'll be over here. All right, that might be a better setup.
Robin.
There's a camera right here behind you. There you go.
You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Megan Eakin, MEGAN EAKIN,
And Megan, by whom are you employed?
by Orsted.
All right, and what is your job at Orsted?
I'm the permit manager for the Revolution Wind Project.
Is Revolution Wind the only project that you're working on?
It is, yes.
All right, and again, before we get into your job on the Revolution Wind project, please describe to the council briefly your educational background and your experience before you joined Orsted.
Yes, I have a bachelor's in geology and environmental science, also a master's in geology. After college, I worked for a few years as an environmental technician. And then in 2008, I joined Ecology and Environment, which is now WSP, as a junior geologist. Had a very successful career there. I was promoted about every 3 years or so. And about the time I became a senior geologist, I also took on the role of more of a project manager, where I was focusing on large, complex infrastructure projects in the offshore environment.
Great, thank you. And Megan, now describe to the council what you do as permitting manager for Revolution Wind.
Yeah, so my job is to oversee the Revolution Wind permitting team for Orsted. I know you heard Kellen mention we have a lot of different teams. My responsibility there is particularly our permitting package. But I also do coordinate and collaborate with our other internal teams, such as you'll hear from Gareth this evening, our site investigations team, our marine affairs teams, as we go through our permitting process on Revolution Wind. I'm also responsible for management and oversight of our consultants. You'll hear from some of them later this evening. As Kellen also mentioned, VHB, Inspire, and such. And then also, as part of my role, I did help prepare the package that went to CRMC for our certified verification agent for the project, which is an independent third-party review as the project moves through the varying phases.
And that certified verification agent, or CVA, was referred to earlier in Justin's description of the staff report, correct?
Yes, it was, and it was also provided to BOEM because they have very similar guidelines to CRMC for the CVA.
Great. And again, we've got so many acronyms. For BOEM, it's the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, CVA is certified verification.
Yes.
Great. So Megan, explain briefly and focus on the state permits that Revolution needs to construct its project.
So first and foremost, is we're here tonight to talk about the Category B ascent with CRMC. But we also, in this past July, received our order from the Energy Facility Siting Board. So that was great news for the project. And then we also have applied for a water quality certificate and a dredge permit through the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management.
Great, thank you. And did you work on the Category B application that's before the council here tonight?
Yes, I have. Did.
Okay, and what was your role with the development of that application?
It was my job to oversee and collaborate with VHB and the other subject matter experts that provided information, and our internal teams as that application was prepared. And then it was also my job to review and provide feedback on that application to make sure we were meeting the regulations of the Red Book and the OSAM before we submitted that to the agency for review.
Great. And since the filing of the application, have you had ongoing communications with CRMC staff about the application. I think some of that was referred to earlier, but would you like to add to that?
Yeah, as was noted by, I think, both Mr. Willis and Mr. Skenyon, we've been meeting regularly. The staff has done a great job reviewing the questions. As evident in those discussions we've had with them and their information requests. We've come, a very long way providing supporting information. And as Mr. Willis noted, meeting regularly to talk about issues such as cable burial and installation.
Right, and talk to us now a little bit about the outreach Revolution Wind has done to certain groups, particularly the public. Can you address that?
So COVID did put a little hamper on, in-person outreach, but the Revolution Project does maintain a project website, which has a virtual meeting room that everyone can access. And then more recently, this past June, we did hold an in-person open house at the URI Bay campus, which was a really good attendance and positive experience for the project.
Right, and now, Megan, I finally want to turn to the construction schedule, and we have a demonstrative for that.
See that okay?
And Megan, are you familiar with the construction schedule for Revolution Wind?
I am, yes.
Okay, and does this demonstrative show the approximate construction schedule for the project?
It does. This is a kind of quarterly high-level indicative schedule for the whole entire project, the offshore wind farm all the way to the onshore components.
So I'd like you to focus, and you feel free to walk up if that helps you at all and point out what line you're talking about. But I'd like you to focus on the installation of the cables in state waters and when that will occur. So can you
Yes.
talk us through that, please?
Certainly. So there's a couple of portions that will happen, particularly in state waters. The landfall construction, which you heard Kellen mentioned, and Gareth will get into a little bit more detail on, would happen in the fall of 2023. And then the export cable route would happen in the fall of 2024. So that schedule does align. We did take into account those time of year restrictions that were noted in the staff report. So that's been worked into that schedule for when we can be on the water.
All right, and let's break it down more specifically on when the export cable will be installed in state waters. During what months of the year will that occur, Megan?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of activities that, again, Gareth will talk about a little bit later that encompass around like the cable installation, but all those activities would happen between September 1st and January 31st. Cable installation itself would happen in the months of October and November.
And so does the cable installation in the months of October and November, that covers state waters, correct?
Yes,
And that's about 23 miles of cable,
correct.
correct, and 2 cables?
And 2 cables,
All
yes.
right, so October and November. And does that schedule align with the time of year restrictions that we've been talking about this evening?
It does, yes. So we are restricted from doing in-water work or seabed disturbance from February 1st through end of August.
Okay, so with the schedule that you gave, again, getting toward the end of the year, you've got to be out of the water by February 1st or
February 1st.
January 31st. That's it.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Lastly, Megan, and if we could have the chart back up on the screen, please. You're familiar with this chart, correct?
Yes.
And you see where the cable route is, correct?
Yeah.
And can you just show that with your finger, just so?
So if we start up here for the horizontal directional to the landfall, and it kind of moves out towards the state water line.
So you were, just for the record, you were describing from landfall at Quonset Point on the northernmost end there, correct?
Correct.
And then following south through the West Passage and out into Rhode Island Sound and to the state waters limit, correct?
Correct.
All right. Focusing on the schedule again, Megan, in the area that's at the southern tip of Jamestown, the Beavertail area, and going into Rhode Island Sound. With the construction schedule that you talked about a few moments ago, when in that schedule do you estimate you will be installing the cable in that area? Again, just at the southern tip of Jamestown, further south into the Sound.
So that would be approximately late October to November.
Great, thank you. I have no further questions for Megan.
Any questions of Ms. Aiken from anyone on the council? There are none.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I'll call our next witness, if I may,
Yes.
Gareth Ellis. And Gareth, I think it's also a good lineup here. All right.
Sir, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Gareth Ellis, GarethTellis.
So Gareth, by whom are you employed?
Orsted,
And what is your job at Orsted?
I'm the senior electrical practice manager.
Okay. And again, I want to give the council a bit of your background. So before we talk about your job at Orsted as the senior electrical package manager, please tell the council a bit about your background, your education, and your professional experience.
I'm another geologist. I graduated in 1993 in industrial geology. And I took a
Excuse me, just
master's.
keep your voice up a little bit for
Sure,
me.
yes.
I don't know unless you
I
want that.
graduated in,
Industrial
What, you expect all of us?
1993, and I took a master's in the same subject in
I don't think you
1994.
should.
I then proceeded to work in the oil and gas industry in the North Sea
You know,
as a surveyor and a geologist.
it's much. That's
And then post that, in 2000, I started working in installation and trenching of subsea cables for oil and gas and other pipelines, etc. For the last 14 years, where I worked solely on offshore wind, I've installed, my management has been installing 750 kilometers of cables in total, which represents 2.9 gigawatts of power, which can power up to 1.5 million homes. I'm very proud to bring that out. It's that's all in Europe, and I'm very proud and happy to be trying to contribute to Rhode Island.
Thank you, Gareth. And Gareth, how long have you been with Orsted?
6 years in total and 18 months on this project.
Okay. And are you working solely on Revolution Wind right now?
That's correct.
All right. So tell the council what you do as the senior electrical package manager for Revolution Wind.
So I lead and manage the team of approximately 20 people who perform the due diligence on all the supply and installation contracts and contractors. That encompasses also the contract management and the document controller, etc. that goes around this. And then I report directly to the project director.
Great. And Gareth, given your position at Orsted, do you know if Revolution Wind has selected a contractor yet for the installation of the cable?
Yes, we have.
And who is that contractor?
That's Nexans, Nexans.
And why was Nexon selected?
So we have a rigorous procurement procedure, it's a quality management plan for all our projects and all our procurement actually. But in particular for this project started in 2019, where we had 6 pre-approved cable contractors who did performance work. They were taken through a process of 3 individual rounds. And at the end of the 3rd round, 2 were taken forward to the last round, the best and final offer, the BAFO, you might have heard it called. The final part of that process is to go to the fine-tooth comb, the full evaluation of everything technical, commercial, union labor, local content, etc. And at the end, our evaluation came out with Nexans as being the leader of the 2.
Great, thank you. And let's talk about the cable route selection process. Are you familiar with the cable route selection process for Revolution Wind?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and describe how the route was selected for Revolution Wind's export cables in Rhode Island waters.
So in the early development stages, there is a preliminary route. That preliminary route is then used to design the surveys that will be used to rehome that route into a viable route. During that survey, the first one was 2017, we performed a geotechnical survey, which is interacting with the seabed itself with drills and called cone penetration.
Did you say cone penetration?
Cone, yes.
Okay.
Cone penetration, which gives us a feel for the stiffness of the soils. Then there's a geophysical survey, which then gives us a picture of the seabed, and we can understand where boulders and debris, etc., is. And then a magnetometer survey, which gives us information on potential munitions, as Helen had pointed out. All that goes to produce a ground model. Ground model is used to both procure, to put forward to the contractors so they can develop their techniques and their trenching machines. And then finally, after they've done their further assessments during the procurement stage and post-contract, now next time to perform the final route analysis, which will then give them full methodology that they use to install.
So Nexus participated in the route selection process with Revolution Wind, is that
Yes,
correct?
both at procurement stage and then post-procurement, they're now involved in finding that route.
Thank you. And do you know how the seabed will be prepared in order for the cable to be installed?
Yes.
Could you explain that to the council and again, keep your voice up? Please?
Yeah, sure. First process that we talked about here, boulders on the seabed, and Mr. Skenyon pointed it out very, very nicely before. We will actually have 49 boulders which need to be cleared along the two routes in the 23 nautical miles. These are ranging in size, but from 0.330 centimeters up to 4, which are between 1 meter and 1.5 meters.
And how big is a meter?
3 feet.
3 feet or so?
3 feet.
Okay, all right.
Approximately.
Okay.
Yeah, so we will need to clear these boulders because we don't want them to be coming into contact with the trenching machines. So how we do this is we use a grab similar to amusement arcade grab when you pick a teddy bear. It lifts the boulder up itself, and perpendicular to where we find it on the route, approximately 10 meters away, we then deploy that. So it's away from the trenching machine, which will pass through when we lay the cable itself. That's the first process. We clear all those boulders. Once we've done that, we perform what we call a pre-lay grapnel run. A pre-lay grapnel, grapnel. And a grapnel is like an anchor. In this particular scenario, this anchor will be have a tine, so that's the loop on the anchor itself. 1.5.
Kind of like what you have on a rake, a time.
A hook on a rake,
Yeah.
almost, yeah. 0.5 meters, 30, 50 centimeters. And we use that to drag through the seabed to the surface to clear any debris which may be there, which may cause a problem to the plow or to the jetting tool. Such items as ropes or even logs which have floated down and subsequently sunk to the seabed, because we don't want to get that caught up in our machine when we've got a power cable in the machine itself. Once we perform that particular activity, we then have a final survey, which is visual with ROV, remotely operated vehicle, which is a small submarine. It will have cameras and sonars, and it will give us a clear picture of the seabed. We can then give that to a master of our vessels and say we're good to go, and the seabed is clean.
And you talked about moving some boulders, and was it 49 boulders over the 23 miles that need to be moved?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And then you mentioned the grapnel run. Gareth, have you read the Category B application that's before the council tonight?
Yes.
And was there another method of clearing the seabed mentioned in the Category B application other than the grapnel run?
Yes, so during the application, we hadn't finalized our studies on seabed mobility, and we hadn't finalized what techniques we'd use for laying and trenching cable. So in order to keep that opportunity open, if there was some significant sand waves, we need to clear them to allow the cable to be laid to a depth which would mean it wouldn't be exposed in the future. You can imagine a large sand wave would need dredging to clear it. So we now know that we don't need to do that. And the only technique we need to clear the seabed is the pre-lay grapnel.
So there's no sand waves that need to be cleared in state waters, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And what creates more disturbance to the sediments? The dredging machine that you would have used had there been sand waves, or the grapnel run that you now can use?
So most definitely the dredging machine being sideways.
Thank you. So I want to turn now to the actual installation of the cable in state waters. And what I would like to do is have you explain, if you can, how that will be done, but we'll take it in segments, and we'll start first with the landfall area, which you've heard about and Kellen spoke about. Talk about how the cable will be installed at the landfall area at Quonset Point. And
Yeah.
be brief.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Well, Mr. Kenyon explained it very well.
Yes, he did.
Thank you.
So we'll be using horizontal drilling, HDD. We will drill from the shore side to the marine side, approximately 400 meters of drill. We will ream the hole so we make it sufficient size for the cable to be pulled into. And once that's completed, we will then pull in what we call a conduit, which is a polyethylene pipe. Now, that polyethylene pipe is going to be manufactured on the north side of Quonset Airport and towed around to site and pulled through into the duct itself, into the borehole itself to create the duct. The duct is then sealed at both ends and is lowered in the seabed so that for the small interim period between the completion of the HDD and the start of the export cable, we will have a safe area within the bay there.
Great. So once the HDD process is done, then what happens next on the marine side or the water side from the HDD pit out into the West Passage of Narragansett Bay? Let's talk about that next second.
Sure. So as you probably know, it's very shallow water there. So we can't bring in a larger cable installation vessel. We're using what we call nearshore barge. That barge is it moves on anchors and is also towed by an anchor handling tug. The barge will be moved into position next to the HDD duct, which will then be, the seal will then be removed by divers. A rope is then passed through the duct and a winch wire from near shore, from the onshore side, will pull the cable through the duct. We make sure that there's no sediment within the duct as we're doing that by placing what we call a bell mouth, which is looks like a bell, and it's a fluted piece of steel which lifts the duct off the seabed. Once you've installed it and secured it into the onshore side, we start to lay away with the nearshore barge. As we start to lay away, we'll deploy what we call the jet plow. That is the trenching machine for the nearshore area. The jet plow uses two swords to inject swords. Sorry.
I'm getting the accent.
Yeah, I know. And it fluidizes the sediment and creates a slim trench where the cable will fall into the trench. In fact, it's encapsulated with the machine itself, so it's placed on the bottom of the trench. The trench then collapses in behind, and the sediment settles back down on top of the cable itself. The barge will move out to just south of Jamestown Bridge, taking approximately 4 days in total to do that piece of work. And then it will lay the cable onto the seabed there and leave it there, partially buried so it's away from any attrition from any outside forces, until the main vessel will come back and pick it up at a later date. The barge then goes back to the second duct and does exactly the same thing all the way through post Jamestown Bridge. Just one more thing, the barge has our spare cable on for the operations period. It will then go to Providence Port, our new O&M facility there, as Callum discussed, and offload that cable and store it there for the duration of the project.
So Gareth, before the barge comes up to Providence, it will leave the cable where it is. And that barge is needed on the northern side of the Jamestown Bridge because the water there is too shallow for the larger vessel. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So Then another vessel comes in just south of the Jamestown Bridge to pick up the cable, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, so please explain to the council that next step in the process
sure.
for laying the cable.
Yeah. So the Nexans vessel, it's called the Aurora, as in Borealis. And it will pick up the cable, which is on the seabed left by the nearshore barge, and take it up onto the deck of the vessel. We will then join the two cables, the one which is already on the vessel, to the vessel, to the cable which is picked up. And that needs to be a very clean environment, almost like the factory itself. And actually, we use very experienced jointers to perform this work, and specifically on the vessel to do this work. Because we want to make sure that every joint we do is as best quality as we can to prevent any potential risk in the future. Once that's performed, and that takes 7 days, the cable vessel will start to lay away, and it will lay the joint down gently on the seabed for trenching later. As the vessel pulls away, we'll deploy what we call a mechanical plow. So that is a device which also encapsulates the cable through it and creates a trench in the seabed. The way it does that is it has some jetting to pre-fluidize soils ahead of it, but it uses what they call a share, which is a common piece of steel on a plow, which is a front edge like a knife, and it will cut through the seabed and create this trench. The way it moves forward is it's pulled literally by the vessel itself. And the cable lay vessel has, at this point, 2 times 34 kilometers of cable on it, so we'll go well past the state boundary and lay that cable down. Once that's complete, we come back again, pick up the second joint, and we do exactly the same.
Great, thank you. And that completes the installation of the cable at that point, correct?
Correct.
So let's move on to another issue, and that is, are you familiar with the term target burial depth?
Yes, I am.
And what does that mean here in regard to the Revolution Wind export cables?
So of course, we heard before we have 4 to 6 feet target, which all our equipment is aimed to achieve, and in fact, some areas slightly deeper. And our contractor is specifically engaged to perform that work to install a cable beneath that target.
Are there any areas where the cable will be buried deeper than 6 feet?
Yeah, so just at the entrance to the bay, we have the Narragansett traffic separation scheme. We know there we've got a lot of activity. We've got a lot of large vessels there. So our risk analysis shows us that we should go slightly deeper than the target, the deepest CRMC target, and that's 2.5 meters or 8.2 feet.
And let's talk about what happens if the target of 4 feet is not met on cable depth. And before we go to that point, explain what burial means. It means below the seabed floor, correct?
Yes.
And then you're measuring from the top of the cable to the natural seabed, is that correct?
That's correct. So
All right.
it's from the very top of the cable, the actual seabed level, which is the trenching started.
All right, so what happens if the cable is not buried to the target of 4 feet?
So again, we have a rigorous process which is backed up by all the procedures and contract with the installation contractor. The first point of contact here is to look into the risk assessment, which we will do. That's an engineering document which takes into account all the shipping traffic and all the fishing activity, and also the seabed mobility studies that we've done. And we can then see if the risk of where the cable actually is, let's say, for example, 3 feet rather than 4 feet, if the risk is such that we do not need to go any deeper, then we would leave the cable at that depth. We don't want to necessarily trench something where we know it's already at low risk. By performing additional trenching on it, we can then put it at risk by performing trenching. Although that is a low risk in itself, it's still something we would rather avoid if we know it's deep.
So have you heard the term secondary protection?
Yes.
And what is secondary protection in regard to these cables?
Can I just take a quick step back? So
Absolutely.
the second part of the process actually is that if we find that we're not within that safe area of the risk that we've engineered, then we will place what the machine called the CapJet, CAPJET. This is a Nexans machine, a trenching machine, which uses a fluidization, again, similar to the jet plow, but it's a much bigger, more powerful machine, and it moves under its own propulsion. That is based on the Aurora vessel. So that once we see if that cable is not buried deep enough, we'll put that onto the cable and we'll try to bury it deeper. If we subsequently survey that and we see it's still not deep enough within that risk zone we talked about, then we will place secondary protection. And by secondary protection, as was pointed out before, we mean either flexible concrete mattresses, rock bags, which are polyethylene nets filled with rock, or rock berms, which are placed by a separate vessel onto the seabed.
So you said a few minutes ago that you've read the Category B application, correct?
Yes.
And did you see in that application where Revolution Wind estimated approximately 10% secondary protection plus cable crossings?
Yes.
All right. So first, let's talk about the cable crossings. Again, they've been described briefly before, but approximately how many cable crossings have you identified as of now?
So we have 7 in state waters here.
Okay. And so you need to cross those cables, protect the other cables, whether they're owned by Verizon or other entities, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then put your cable over that secondary protection
Yes,
and then protect your cable.
yes. So in order to create a positive separation between the two cables, if there was ever to be any scour, we place a concrete mattress, a full concrete mattress. And we lay our cable on top of that. And then on top of our cable, we will also lay concrete mattresses. Our cable is shrouded in steel wires, so it's protected between those two mattresses itself. And yet we have 7 of these locations to undertake.
Okay, so 7 crossings of other cables.
Yep.
But then you'll have other potential areas where secondary protection is required, correct? All right, and the application estimated about 10% of the cable route would have such secondary protection, correct?
Yes.
Standing here tonight, what do you estimate, Gareth, for the secondary protection for the cable route?
Our studies are showing that it should be 5%, not 10%, and that's because we have taken all the ground model we discussed. The contractor has taken their new methodology and their plow and everything into account based on the track record of plowing these types of soils. And they've redefined that to give us an idea, also for planning purposes, of what the amount of extra secondary protection we might need. Just bear in mind, the trenching machines are designed for this particular job, soils, etc. So it's only in the mitigation. We don't achieve that for other reasons that we would use that secondary protection.
But you've been able, based on all the work that's been done, to cut in half the estimate on the amount of secondary protection, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So a few minutes ago, you may have heard some questions about the cable itself and any armoring on the cable. Can you describe the cable generally and what it's made up of?
Yeah, sure. So there's 3 individual cores, and there are the cross-sectional area is 800 millimeters of copper. These are trefoil, TREFOIL layup. So the 3 cables are laid together and twisted together. There's also a fiber optic cable in there. And then on the outside of the whole cable, we have armoring of both steel and polyethylene, which protects the cable and gives it extra stiffness for installation.
And do you know if there's any value to the twisting of the cable as you described it?
Well, as Mr. Skelly pointed out, it is a feature that can reduce the
Thank you. So let's turn to the amount of time it will take on a per-day basis to install the cable. Earlier, Megan testified to the construction schedule. But do you know, Gareth, how much cable is estimated to be installed on a per-day basis in state waters?
Yeah, so it's around 5 kilometers a day, 2.5 to 3 nautical miles a day, which is fairly rapid. The type of trenching technique that we're using allows us to move at that sort of speed, 250 meters per hour.
250 meters per hour? Thank you. And is the cable lay process a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week process?
Yes.
Okay, and why is that?
There's a few reasons. So in the short term, we obviously have a weather window to predict, and the further outside of that window you look at, the less higher risk of some weather coming in. If weather comes in, we have to stand with the cable or cut the cable and come back again. So we don't want to do that. So we always perform 24/7 so that we can be the most effective and efficient we can be in that process. Of course, we've got the TOY boundary to consider at the end.
Time of year restriction? Okay.
Time of year restriction, and we don't want to, bump into that either. So, the simple plan is we need to get in and lay the cable as fast as we can. Now, if we were to, let's say, stop for a weekend or something like that, the cable would be sat on the vessel, or we wouldn't want to cut the cable and come back again because of this joint, which takes 7 days. And the quicker we can do this.
Is it customary in the industry, based on your experience, to lay a cable like the ones Revolution Wind will use on a 24/7 progress?
Yes.
Thank you. So finally, Gareth, I want to turn to operations and maintenance of the cable. What is anticipated for the operations and maintenance of the cable?
So we'll develop a plan based on the permit requirements, and on top of that, our own requirements for assessment of areas of where we know we have crossings and secondary protection. We've already discussed a little bit here. The whole of the bay is relatively benign in terms of seabed mobility. There are some sand waves, and we've done some engineering work to show that these can range between 0.25 of a meter and half a meter further out past the Rhode Island Sound there. So we're quite confident that we're going to bury it and it's going to stay buried and not be exposed over its lifetime. Of course, there's some significant storms, as we know, and we will assess them on a storm by storm severe weather event basis as to whether we would then need to go back and potentially look at seabed protection, secondary protection.
Right. Thank you very much. I have no further questions for Gareth Ellis.
Any questions of council members of Ms. Ellis? Yes.
So there are 2 cables, correct?
Correct.
Will the 2 trenches and 2 trenching operations some distance apart?
Yes, and the distance varies as we go through the bay because we engineer the route around certain features and boulders, etc. But we try and keep them within a reasonable separation, so we're not using too much of the bay.
Do you have 2 trenching operations going on at the same time, or
The same vessel, yes. The nearshore barge will do one 9.7 kilometer route out to Jamestown Bridge.
You can have this.
I'll turn it around, and then the main lay vessel will do 1 cable at a time. Yeah.
So when we talk about the amount of time that it's going to take to lay the cable, you said it would take 4 days for the barge to lay its cable.
Yeah.
Is that for both of the cables that the barges lay?
Each one will take 4 days, yes.
So is that a total of 8 days?
Yes.
Okay. And you said the Aurora would take 7 days to lay the cable south of the Jamestown Bridge to the turbine.
That's correct.
Yeah. So we double that, so take into consideration. So we take 14 days to lay the 2 cables
Yeah, but I'd like to also add that we have to join the cables together, and that's a 7-day period too. So in fact, one cable will take 14, two will take 28.
And the cable laying operation, part of it is digging the trench, part of it is laying the cable. Is that done simultaneously?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we call it simultaneous lay and burial. And in both cases, the nearshore barge and the mainland vessel, we have simultaneous lay and burial techniques. The cable actually is encapsulated through the machine and has what we call a depressor, which sits on the back of the cable, which makes sure it goes into the trench at the bottom of where we've created the trench.
Is there any anchoring of the cable? Once anchoring, once it's in the trench, or does it just get buried with the sediment?
Yeah, it's self-weight, takes it to the bottom of the trench as well as the depressor, and the trench walls collapse and the sediment settles back down on top of the cable itself, in behind, a short distance behind the trench. But there's no physical anchoring of the actual cable.
And are you aware of supply chain issues that other wind turbine companies, maybe Ørsted, other places are experiencing?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes.
And are supply chain issues going to affect the schedule for the substation, marine cable?
No. The issues that we're facing is planning around the multiple jobs that are going on and a limited amount of vessels in the US capable of supporting the work. So that's ongoing work, but there's no delays on this project. So,
You don't anticipate any issues?
No.
Getting the cables or getting the turbines themselves?
No. I mean, in fact, the cables are manufactured by Nexans in Charleston, North Carolina there. And
South Carolina.
South Carolina. Yes. So excuse my US geography. It's right on Rhode Island. But it's further south. Yeah, and so we've got our own quality managers within that factory, and they're keeping a 24-hour view on the cable as it's made.
Thank you.
I just have a couple quick questions. One, back to your Boulder relocation plan.
Yeah.
I wasn't clear on what you were saying with respect to where those are going relative to essential fish habitat, or just the areas that are really important relative to our commercial and recreational fisheries.
Okay, so our intention is to move the boulder only as far away as it won't impact the trenching machine. Trenching machines are approximately 5 meters, 6 meters wide. So we will aim to move it only 10 meters from the center line of where we're trenching the cable. So this will mean that it will be moved into a very similar location as to where it came from. So we move them perpendicular to the route by 10 meters.
Right, so those areas have been surveyed relative to essential fish habitat?
Yes, so the whole swathe, 50 meters of each route has been surveyed, and all the habitats, so all the due diligence on the route and archaeological and everything like that is done. And we would only ever move a rock to a position in a known surveyed area.
Okay, thank you. And then I just had another question regarding something you said about, if you were talking about, I think it was during your discussion of the landfall location, and it was shortly after that relative to those areas that we've now discussed with the secondary protection. You said if it can't go down to 4 feet, if the risk is such that is considered low risk, and I'm not clear on what is considered that.
Okay.
Risk is such
Yeah.
versus low risk. Could you just explain that a little
So
bit?
we use an industry standard engineering report called the Cable Burial Risk Assessment. Acronym is CBRA, CBRA. This is used to, we take the ship traffic data for the whole area and the fishing activities, and we put them together into a risk matrix to understand the quantity of vessels and type of anchors that are moving across the cables during a certain period, and same with fishing activity. So that we know some areas where we've got neither of these with very low risk. So if we only reach, say, 3 feet, we know that we don't need to go deeper, because actually the risk of anything coming into contact with the cable is very low. Whereas we know in other areas, for example, the traffic separation scheme, we need to get that cable buried to the actual depth that we have required it to be buried to, because the risk is high.
So what you're describing, I think, is risk for interaction of vessels and or fishing gear
Correct.
with the cable, but that doesn't address the risk that Justin was talking about with respect to EMF. I mean, that doesn't really address the presence of benthic species or, I mean, I thought that was one of the major issues relative to risk when you can't go to the 4 to 6 feet deep.
Well, we bury to 3 feet, as Mr. Skennings pointed out, that the risk is much lower, and the risk is obviously increasing slightly as we.
I think he said 3 feet. Did you say 3 feet?
Yeah.
So the estimates for the EMF I gave tonight were at 3 feet. As a worst case, that would not be mitigated that was given as an estimate, so.
We have to imagine that these areas where we will not potentially reach that depth will only be small lengths of cable, because the machines themselves obviously designed to create the depth that we're targeting.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Gomez.
You discussed connections a couple of times now. How many? One? The connection cable to cable?
Yeah,
How
so
many?
in the state waters, there's only 2, so 1 per cable. They're both to the south of
Are
Jamestown.
they the same basic, are they different cables or just the same cable? Same cable? And that seems like a pretty critical operation. You explained it took quite a bit of time, and the conditions you're going to have to be under to do that.
Yeah. The benefit of us actually having Nexans manufacture the cable and install the cable is that we have their factory experts to do that joint on the vessel. So it's really good for us that the vessel is very much planned like their own
It's
factory.
a fairly large vessel or not?
It's over 100 meters long.
That's pretty good. Okay. The only other, so you've got 2, and you agree that's a critical operation, I guess.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I had was back on the EMF, and it sounds to me, well, a couple issues here, it sounds to me that what you're looking for EMF reduction is basically the burial, as opposed to shielding inside the cable. Sounded like your cable construction was pretty normal.
In every case, burial is best. Yeah.
And you said, I think I got this number wrong, you said 800 millimeters with the diameter of the cable.
800 millimeters square is a cross section of the copper of each core. Yeah.
That's pretty good size.
Yeah, it's a big old cable. Yeah, like a dinner plate.
If I did my math right, it's 30 inches or so.
Yeah.
Wow. I had not envisioned that.
And it's a very stiff cable. It's very heavy, so it sinks.
Exactly. I mean, that's a benefit there, but it seems like it would make transportation and stuff a little more difficult.
It is heavy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions from council members? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. My partner, Christine Dieter, will present our next witness.
So we'd like to call Drew Perry. Well, if it's only gonna be 10 minutes.
It's up to you and the chair.
Do you want to take a break?
Yeah, at some point.
Yeah, we'll do it now. Yep, before we start. Yeah, we'll do about a 10-minute break.
I'd be like high school.
You guys run the show. Have to be here.
That's tough.
Good job. Thank you. I think that one, yeah, good. They haven't presented anything I submitted. I do wish I missed, I addressed the cap. But honestly, it was not.
And you know what?
I think it went well.
No, I think we're okay. record, and I just want to, for the record's sake, indicate that we're muted. We okay?
The recording audio remote. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, just for the record, Councilmember Sahajian had to leave. He had a medical emergency, a family, but everything's okay, but he had to leave. And we can proceed without it. We still have a quorum. And Attorney Dita?
Mr. Chair, we will call our next witness, Drew Carey.
You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Drew Carey, DREWCAREY.
Dr. Carey, where are you employed?
I'm employed with Inspire Environmental in Newport.
And what is your position with Inspire Environmental?
I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Inspire.
What are your responsibilities with that role?
So I manage a team of scientists. Scientists collect data, study the seafloor and all the resources that depend on that.
Could you briefly describe for the council your professional and educational background?
Certainly. So my whole career has been spent studying the ecology of the seafloor. In order to do that, I have a PhD in both marine geology and marine ecology. I had an academic career of research and teaching at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and Stony Brook University. When I finished my academic career, I began here in Rhode Island as a consultant studying the effects of dredge material on the seafloor.
Have you performed during your career any studies within the area of Narragansett Bay and Rhode Island Sound?
Yes, as part of that work and subsequent work, I've spent over 3 decades studying Narragansett Bay, Rhode Island Sound, Long Island Sound, and other parts of the world. And most recently, of course, offshore wind.
And what work have you done in connection with offshore wind?
I started with the Block Island Wind Farm. We did a site assessment looking at the site of the turbines, the cable route, and advised Deepwater Wind at that time about the location of the cable and the turbines.
Have you previously testified before any regulatory bodies?
Yes, the Connecticut Energy Siting Board, the Energy Facility Siting Board, and the Article 7 process in New York State.
And the Energy Facility Siting Board that you mentioned, that's the Rhode Island?
Rhode
Energy
Island,
Facility
correct.
Siting Board?
Yeah.
Have any of these bodies recognized you as an expert in any field?
Yes,
And what fields?
as a marine ecologist.
Mr. Chair, I would ask that the council recognize Dr. Carey as an expert in marine ecology.
Do that, right?
Well, typically, we don't, for this agency, qualify experts. The fact that you have detailed his educational and experience background is enough for the council to weigh his credentials when he renders opinion testimony.
Have you worked on the Revolution Wind project, Dr. Carey?
Yes, I have.
And when did you begin work in connection with the Revolution Wind project?
Well, I started as soon as it was, the lease was approved in 2013.
And what did that work involve?
So we began with site assessment work. That includes the benthic assessment work, essential fish habitat monitoring, fish and recreational fishing, and a few other smaller elements, but those are the primary ones.
And has that work that Inspire Environmental performed been incorporated into the application that's before the council this evening?
Yes, for the Category B application, there's a technical report on benthic assessment, a technical report on essential fish habitat, and one on commercial and recreational fishing. For each of those, my staff collected data, wrote the reports, and I managed and reviewed each of the documents.
You mentioned that one of those reports was an essential fish habitat report.
That's correct.
In that report, the statement is made that the installation of cables in Narragansett Bay could disturb animals, and that as much as 1 to 3 years could be required for recovery. How did this recovery affect fish resources in the vicinity of the export cable?
Well, that recovery estimate, as I think Mr. Skenyon indicated, it could take several years for the seafloor, and the seafloor is a mixture of sediment and animals. But we've studied that process for many decades. And initially, there's actually a lot of food on the surface as a result of sediment disturbance. There's 3 stages. The first stage is just almost weed-like little tiny animals that show up. They're fish food. Then the second stage are a little bit larger, maybe about 1 inch long. They form small tubes. And that's also very heavily grazed by fish. So fish move in literally immediately. There's animals rendered by the disturbance that are available, and then the recovery. And then eventually, that second stage, the fish graze them. We often find them in fish stomachs. Then there's a third stage where there's much deeper burrowing organisms, and that's in the sort of 1 year, slightly longer phase.
I want to break this down a little bit if we can. So you talked about sort of this phased recovery. How long do those different phases take?
Sure. So there is a very well-established model of succession. It's similar to what you might see in a field that's cleared. The first stage takes weeks. So those little teeny animals that are almost hard to see, that takes anywhere from 1 to 6 weeks for them to appear. The second stage, those larger organisms, typically we would see them 3 to 6 months would begin to appear during that phase, or sometimes as early as 1 month. Then following that, anywhere from 9 months to a year, we begin to see evidence of these deeper burrowing organisms. They move in from the side of a small area, or they will settle and begin to grow, and they burrow very deeply into the sediment. So total year and a half to that level of completion.
So this year to a year and a half compared to the 1 to 3 years that's referenced in the report, would it be fair to characterize the 1 to 3 year range in the report as conservative?
Well, yes, that's a very conservative estimate that we put in the report. In dynamic environments like Narragansett Bay or even parts of Rhode Island Sound, the seafloor is subjected to storms and other sort of disturbance, and that can sometimes accelerate the process by bringing animals in, and sometimes it can slow it down. So there's a bit of a range.
And you said that within, say, 6 weeks or those first 6 weeks after the disturbance, the tiny organisms that can be fish food will be returning to the area. So when do you expect fish could return to the area after the disturbance?
So in the process that was described of fluidizing the sediments or physically moving them through, it's somewhat similar to dredging, for instance, in the Providence River. And what happens there is that the animals float up to the surface that are in the sediments, and the fish move in right away and begin feeding on those. We have done studies watching that happen. It's sort of as soon as the sediments settle down, the fish come in, so days.
Thank you. I want to switch to a different topic now. Are you familiar with the term area of particular concern, or APC, as it's used in CRMC's Ocean Special Area Management Plan?
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar with the recreational boating APC that's identified in the ocean sound?
Yes, I am.
How does the area identified in the recreational boating APC relate to recreational boating?
So I was a participant in the Ocean Special Area Management Plan, as some of you know, in the stakeholder meetings, the public meetings following that through. And there was one section which was recreational boating and tourism. And in that group, Dr. Robin Wallace from Newport, he was the head of the State Yachting Commission. He provided the OSAMP with a list of 7 what are called buoy yachting races. So these are offshore races defined by buoys that the yachts would transit around. And so those 7 races were put into Chapter 6, and then a figure was put in which corresponded to the location of those buoys. And that area that's in the SAMP corresponds to that recreational boating APC.
I'd like to pull up, if I may, what we previously submitted as Exhibit C to Revolution Wind's request for a special exception. Dr. Carey, are you familiar with this figure?
Yes, I supervised our geographical information specialist to prepare this map.
And could you describe for the council generally what this shows?
Sure, I'll use a pointer to make sure that I'm clear. So I think to most of you, you recognize the Rhode Island coastline here, and the landmass is in a sort of a slight yellow green. This is the OSAMP boundary, so the OSAMP was concerned with the offshore area.
And that's the red line you're.
I'm sorry, the red line for the stenographer, I apologize. Then there is a dotted or dashed line in black, which is the state water boundary. Then inside the state water boundary, there are a series of pink circles. These correspond to the recreational boating APC. There is a blue polygon or sort of long fat line. That is the cable corridor extending from the state boundary at the dashed line all the way to Quonset inside the bay.
And Dr. Carey, approximately how large is the recreational boating APC?
So as you can see in the legend here, the recreational boating APC is a little over 16,000 acres.
And it appears in this figure that there's a portion of the export cable that is going to overlap or go through the recreational boating APC. Is that correct?
That's correct. And you can see that by combining the blue with the pink, you get a purple polygon associated with that overlap.
And approximately what percentage of the recreational boating APC will be touched by the export cable corridor as shown in this figure?
So within state waters, that's slightly over 10% of the whole recreational boating APC in state waters.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions for Dr. Carey.
I have a question. Did you say 10%? I was writing something.
Yes,
It goes-
10%. So the dark purple.
The purple area represents about 10%. Okay, thank you. Any questions of council members?
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question relative to that area, the buoy racing area and the overlap and the construction timing. And if you could just sort of elaborate a little bit on, I understand 10% spatially, but what are we talking about in terms of that area relative to those activities that you were involved in, identified in the SAMP and the OSAMP, and then also the scheduling that we heard from before?
Madam Council Member, if I may, our next witness is going to address that in greater detail.
Okay, but
I'll answer it as best I can. I didn't provide the information. It was Dr. Wallace, but those races occur between June and September each year. And I think the next witness will probably talk about, but Megan mentioned that activity would be from October, I think, to November. Is that correct? So the active installation occurs after the end of the yachting season.
And then I just had one more question about your phased recovery
Yes.
relative to fish returning, et cetera. Does that phased recovery change relative to the areas that are in the secondary protection? In other words, to the benefit community, does that timeframe, is it a little bit different for those areas, for that 10% or 5% if we are to?
Well, yes, of course. So the recovery that I'm talking about is in what we would call soft sediment. So silt, sand, mud, that kind of thing. It's a very, very specific kind of recovery process. If you place rocks or hard material on the seafloor, it's a different succession. We've been studying that at Block Island and at the Coastal Virginia facility. Within 6 months, you get a covering of algae and other material, if it's shallow enough, on that material, if it's suitable. So if it's steel or rock or certain forms of concrete. Then other organisms begin to attach, but because it's hard, it's a different group of organisms and it has a little bit different succession.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll call our next witness, Ross Pearsall.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
So help you God. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Adrian Ross Pearsall, ADRIANROSSPEARSALL.
Ross, where do you work?
Orsted, North America.
And what's your position at Orsted?
I am the Fisheries Relations Manager.
How long have you been a fisheries relations manager with Orsted?
3 years.
What are your responsibilities in that role?
Very quickly, I oversee a group of 5 people that conducts outreach across our portfolio.
Could you describe briefly for the council your relevant professional experience?
Sure. Before Orsted, I worked for NOAA in the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries as a policy analyst in the Conservation Policy and Planning Department. I run a community supported fishery in Rhode Island. I've worked with the Rhode Island Charter and Party Boat Association on determining what their membership is as part of their Block Island mitigation.
And what's your educational background?
I obtained my bachelor's in government. After that, went on to get my JD and ended up in Rhode Island to get my master's in marine affairs.
Do you have any additional professional certifications?
I do. I'm a licensed attorney in Pennsylvania, and I also obtained my 100-ton mariner's credential, which colloquially known as a captain's license.
So based on your experience, are you familiar with recreational boating that occurs in Narragansett Bay and Rhode Island Sound?
I am.
What types of activities are there for recreational boating here?
It really ranges from everything from sightseeing to day sailing, to sail racing, to just pleasure cruising.
Based on your experience, what is the recreational boating season in Narragansett Bay and Rhode Island Sound?
The height of the season is Memorial Day to Labor Day. There's shoulder seasons on either side of those, and generally a hard stop between their hard dates of in on May 1 and out by November 1.
Why out by November 1?
That's generally tied to moorings and docks in your contract. When you rent one of those, you have hard timelines to be out by November 1.
So I want to pull up here figure 3.2-3 from the application. Are you familiar with this figure?
I am.
Could you identify for the council where the export cable is on this particular figure?
Sure. It's the same as we've seen before. It's this purple red line that starts in Quonset, goes down the West Passage in between Jamestown, Saunderstown, Narragansett, and then out into the ocean.
Based on your experience, are there particular areas of Narragansett Bay and Rhode Island Sound that are popular for recreational fishing? Recreational boating.
I would say that all of it is pretty popular, but there is a larger focus on the Newport area.
And the Newport area is in the East Passage?
It is.
And where is that in relation to where the export cable is going to go?
It is on the other side of Jamestown.
And are you familiar with the proposed construction schedule for the export cable?
I am.
And you heard Megan's testimony earlier that the export cable is going to be installed in late October and November of 2024.
That's correct.
So based on your knowledge of that construction schedule and your familiarity with recreational boating in and around Rhode Island Sound, do you expect export cable construction to have anything more than a minimal impact on recreational boating?
No, I do not.
And are you familiar with sailboat racing in and around Narragansett Bay and Rhode Island Sound?
I am.
What's your experience with sailboat racing?
Well, I've been racing on Narragansett Bay since I was a teenager, but also as part of earning my captain's license, you need to have the requisite number of days at sea. In my case, it was 720 days. And most of that was earned on the boat.
And does your role at Orsted involve any outreach to the sailboat community?
It does. We are affiliated with Shields Fleet 9, which is based in Newport, Rhode Island, and we're racing inside the bay. We've also hosted numerous sailors at our simulator.
Are you familiar with buoy racing that occurs in and around Rhode Island Sound?
I am.
And where does that buoy racing primarily occur?
Buoy racing tends to occur in the bay itself, but also in the shaded circles here.
And when you say in the bay itself, are you talking about the East Passage?
In the East Passage.
And the shaded areas, are those what Dr. Carey identified previously as the recreational boating in PC?
They are.
What time of year does buoy racing typically occur?
In the height of the season, that Memorial Day to Labor Day is the bulk of it. There are a few races on the outside of that, but everything generally stops by Columbus Day.
So you said everything generally stops by Columbus Day.
That's true.
And so given that export cable construction is going to be at the end of October and November, do you anticipate anything more than minimal impacts to buoy racing?
I do not.
In a typical year, how many distance races pass through Narragansett Bay or Rhode Island Sound?
Typically 1 to 3.
And when do those races, those distance races typically occur?
They tend to occur earlier in the season around June.
Are you familiar with the Volvo Ocean Race?
I am.
And will the Volvo Ocean Race be affected by export cable construction?
It will not,
Why not?
because it is making a stopover to Newport East Passage in May of 2023.
And it will not be stopping there, to your knowledge, in 2024?
It will not.
If you look at that figure, can you point out those dashed red lines that are at a diagonal for the council?
Sure, and assuming you mean these 3.
Over on the left there, yes.
Yes, so these 3 dashed lines over on the left are all related to the Annapolis and Newport race.
So generally speaking, those red dashed lines refer to distance sailing races?
That's correct.
You said the 3 furthest to the left refer to the Annapolis to Newport race.
Yes.
How do you know that?
Because these tracks are actually on the Northeast Ocean data portal, and you can go there to click the tracks and see which tracks correspond to which race.
So I want to pull up briefly here what we marked as Exhibit B to Revolution Wind's request for a special exception. Are you familiar with these images?
Yes,
And what are they?
those are screenshots from the Northeast Ocean data portal.
What do they show? Oh, and how do you know what they are?
Oh, the red lines?
No, the images themselves.
Oh, because I took them.
You took them.
Yeah.
Okay. And what do these particular screenshots show?
So they do show a multitude of distance races, but the ones highlighted in red are those 3 Annapolis to Newport routes.
Will the Annapolis to Newport race be affected by export cable installation?
No, it will not,
How come?
because it is also occurring in 2023, and it is a biennial race.
So it will not be occurring in 2024?
That's correct.
And are you familiar with the Newport to Bermuda race?
I am.
Will the Newport to Bermuda race be affected by export cable construction?
No, it will not,
How come?
because that occurs in June.
Thank you, Russ. I do not have any more questions for Mr. Pearson.
Any questions from council members? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Russ. We'll call our next witness, who is Kyle Cassidy.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Kyle Cassidy, Kylecassidy.
Kyle, where do you work?
I work for Orsted.
And what's your role with Orsted?
I'm a fisheries and environmental specialist.
What are your responsibilities in that role?
So for my role at Orsted, I manage all the fisheries related science projects that we have going on across the project portfolio. So that's not only Revolution Wind, but it's all the leases that we have actively under development.
And could you briefly describe for the council your relevant professional background?
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's degree in biology, then I had my master's degree from SMAS. In the focus of my thesis was the Ventless Trap Survey in Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts.
What traps?
The Ventless Trap Survey. And then I have been working for SMAS for about almost 10 years prior to my position at Orsted. There I was the program manager, so I led all the fisheries related research that we did under the direction of Dr. Kevin Stokesbury. We worked cooperatively with the fishing industry on a number of different fisheries, primarily the Atlantic sea scallop fishery, the offshore lobster fleet in Massachusetts, as well as the groundfish fishery in the Gulf of Maine.
Are you familiar with the Revolution Wind Fisheries Research and Monitoring Plan?
Yes, I am.
And what surveys does the plan propose for Rhode Island state waters?
So in state waters, DEM is going to run a ventless trap survey along the cable corridor.
So this is a partnership between Revolution Wind and Rhydom?
Yes,
And what kind of survey did you say it's going to be?
it's a ventless trap survey.
What species are targeted by this survey?
The primary target species of the ventless trap survey is lobster, with Jonah crab as a secondary caught species.
How long is this survey anticipated to run?
So in total, the DEM survey is going to run about 7 years.
And how frequently is it going to sample?
They're going to sample twice per month, every month.
Was this ventless trap survey designed to provide an assessment of commercially and recreationally targeted fishery species in the area of the export cable?
Yes, it was. Rhode Island DEM had significant outreach and input from stakeholders and industry members to help develop the survey, which they felt would accurately represent the commercially and recreational available species in the area.
And those are the species you identified earlier.
Yeah,
as
the American
lobster.
lobster and Jonah crab.
When do you anticipate Revolution Wind's ventless trap survey is going to start?
We anticipate that it's going to start in the winter, with early winter 2020.
And so when you say winter, we're talking December or January?
Yeah, from December through January. Yeah,
Okay, so it's December 2022 or January
2022/23. Yeah.
You heard Megan's testimony earlier that export cable construction will occur in October and November of 2024.
Yes, I did.
So how far in advance of construction is the survey going to be starting?
In total, we estimate that we're going to have about a year and a half, maybe a year and 3/4 worth of pre-construction data.
Why is it that the ventless trap survey isn't going to start until either December 2022 or January 2023?
The initial planned start date was over the summer. We just had some delays that we encountered along the way with regard to Rhode Island DEM's significant outreach efforts and their planning with the industry to develop this survey. And then coordinating with us to get a finalized and agreed upon contract. And then there were supply chain issues associated with DEM acquiring the traps they need to conduct the survey.
Can you say a little bit more about this outreach to the fisheries community?
Yeah, so DEM, it was about a year, I think, they spent with outreach to the fishing industry and other stakeholders to get buy-in for the survey so that they could develop a study that they felt and the community felt would accurately represent the question at hand, which was to determine if there was going to be a change in the population over time as a result of the export cable installation.
And were there supply chain issues that contributed to the delay as well?
Yes, there was. from when DEM started ordering traps, they had a delay immediately. And it's not just limited to them. Other lobster fishermen and industry members have also seen a delay in acquiring traps as a result of the COVID-19 supply chain issues.
And those are the traps required to actually run the survey?
Yes, that's correct.
Are there existing survey programs that assess commercially and recreationally targeted fishery species in the area of the export cable?
Yes, so DEM has been running a ventless trap survey consistently since 2006 to present. And it uses similar survey protocols that they propose to use for the survey.
And so this is also a ventless trap survey?
Yes, it is.
And what is the RIDEM ventless trap survey designed to capture primarily?
So it's designed to capture lobsters, and they also do some bycatch with Jonah crab. They get some bycatch with Jonah crab.
And you said it has a similar sampling methodology to what
Similar
Revolution
sampling,
Wind?
yes, similar sampling methodology. They both sample twice per month. The difference would be that the RIDEM survey samples June, July, and August, the summer months, which is the height of lobster season. And this survey is designed to run year round.
And so the pre-existing RIDEM survey, what geographical areas does that cover?
So it's a stratified random survey. They randomly select stations every year from different strata, but it equally samples the Narragansett Bay area, the Rhode Island Sound area, and the Block Island Sound area.
And so it covers the area that the export cable is going to be going
Yes.
through. In your opinion, with respect to lobster, does the existing RIDEM survey provide a reasonable supplement of pre-construction data to what the Revolution Wind survey is going to capture?
Yes, I do believe that it does.
Can you tell the council why?
So when we designed when DEM designed the survey for Revolution Wind, they did a power analysis, which is the statistical analysis to determine how many samples that you need. Through that analysis and our proposed sampling method, we're sampling significantly higher amount with the proposed study along the cable corridor route than what the DEM state survey samples. So they'll still be able to detect a change in the population with statistical robustness.
So notwithstanding the slightly delayed start, the Revolution Wind survey in collaboration with RIDEM is still going to be able to accomplish its intended purposes.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions for Kyle.
Any questions? Done.
It sounds like you're focusing primarily on lobsters and bycatch. But the lobster population and DEM could maybe help on this, but this year they've had a terrible year. Last year was a good year. It's a really up and down thing, but it appears from commercial lobster fishermen that I deal with, talk to, the lobster centroid of the lobster mass has moved over 100 miles away from here. So it seems that that's a species that we're going to rely on less and less and less. I would worry more about sea bass have really come in, and I'm not sure if that's a commercial fishery or not, but and I don't see where any of what we're going to do would harm that. But maybe you can comment a little bit on shellfish, scallops, those oysters, those types of beds, which it sounds like the material you're in don't raise scallops and lobsters. The scallops are offshore. Maybe not so much oysters. Oysters are probably better in shallow water. But are you looking at those at all, or?
Yeah. So at year one and then post year, as recommended in Cat B, there's a benthic habitat assessment. A benthic habitat assessment, and that assessment will look at the species that dwell in that area.
The shellfish.
Yeah, the shellfish.
But what are you looking for there? Just a disturbance that would occur because of the laying of the cable?
In the benthic habitat assessment?
Yeah.
So that'll be looking at the population at time point 0, so when it is installed, And then it'll look at it over time through, I forget what the time frame is of it, but it's staggered.
They are, but it's being.
Yeah, but it is being done. Yeah,
Thank
there is
you.
an assessment.
I just want to follow up on that question because I am a little unclear on the 1.5-year pre-construction survey, which it sounds like, I mean, that's ventless traps relative to the Jonah crab and the lobster. But just to follow up on my colleague, I guess I'm still not clear on the pre-construction type of surveying that you're doing in the corridor relative to those other species, not just mollusks, but also herring and the squid fishery and the flounder fishery. What kind of pre-construction surveying in the corridor are you doing? And I'm sorry if I missed it when you explained that.
Yeah, so the ventless trap is the only proposed survey, pre-construction in the corridor. And this was not something that we just directed. We DEM designed and came up with the study collectively and then had community engagement. So that is what they determined was the most appropriate survey to sample the species within the bay.
So there's no pre-construction survey in the corridor for the presence of any of the other species that are going through that area?
No, not as aside from bycatch within the lobster trap.
Right, aside from bycatch.
Yes, which they have historical bycatch from the DEM survey as well, so you can have a relative estimate of that.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, if I may, it seems that the area we're talking about would be good fluke, flounder fluke type area. And I would expect that that would be something you really want to look at. It's a pretty commercial fish. And you get some of this area, you get near some of the trap fishermen and things like that. But the fluke fishery, both from a recreational standpoint and a commercial standpoint, it's pretty important. But it doesn't sound like you're looking at that at all.
No, that was, yeah.
Obviously, that season.
Not, part of that, the proposal from DEM.
Does sound like the timeframe, like Robin, the timeframe for when we were doing these things didn't coincide with the fluke fisheries, but it is a very commercial, viable, and recreational fish that you might just think about a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
I believe that concludes our vacancies.
What else you have for that we're looking, planning ahead?
Sure. So my understanding, subject to, again, CRMC staff and the council's desires, is that on November 22nd, which is our next hearing, there'll be discussions and testimony put forth on mitigation. So we'll have several witnesses on that aspect. And then we will present to you our arguments on the special exception, presumptive approval on the recreational area of particular concern, and then the variance on the baseline monitoring.
Okay, so I think we're in a good posture that we can end for this evening. And then recommence our hearing, what's the date?
November 22nd.
November 22. But any last questions from council members of Attorney Main before we do that? Yes.
I have a question for the chair. Are we gonna have objectives testify on the 22nd as well?
Public comment would be on
I think public comment would be scheduled for that day as well. Do we need, I don't need a motion to do, we're just adjourning, right? Or
I'd actually take them to have a motion to what.
All right. Just for completeness sake, I'd entertain a motion to continue this matter to our next date for this matter, which would be November 22nd. Someone want to make that motion? A motion been made and seconded.
Second.
Should do a roll call. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Who wants to do that?
Make a motion. to adjourn the meeting.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
Yep, day before Thanksgiving, get ready.
No, we have a meeting next week.
We do, right? Yeah.
We have a meeting next
I think
week.
we have a meeting
We have a regular meeting on Wednesday.
Wednesday night, and then the following week.
Wednesday.
there's another meeting
Because it's
too,
an
right?
election
Wednesday,
Tuesday.
9th, I think, 9th, and then the 22nd.
Okay,
Two more
okay.
meetings.
All right, cool. All right, great. I thought we had to work, so.
Oh, well, Please, come on up.
Did you see what happened in the board?
We will send a reminder email out.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Thanks, I contacted the board.
You have a lovely
And he gave a text message that he got from Ashley.
Really?
Oh.